suivre l'enseignement que nous vous proposons,
So to follow the training course that we are offering you, you must have acquired a certain amount of knowledge beforehand. The training we offer involves the preparation and the running of a survey, a semi-structured survey. So therefore we have to prepare the implementation of a method to collect information and data. In other terms, we might say that this training aims to help you answer the following question: how can we produce knowledge? But before this question of how, there is the question of which knowledge do we want to produce, for whom, and for which reason. So we will very quickly overview the procedure which allows us to answer these questions. Which knowledge, for whom and why, we will just look at very quickly, because this is not really within the scope of this training scheme.
on ne démarre jamais de rien.
We never start off from scratch, either in terms of knowledge. There is always available literature, data that we can obtain and consult, or in terms of questioning. When we begin or when we plan a survey, it is because we're going to respond to an order, if it's in the scope of a survey, a study, or because we're in a research program that has been developed well upstream of the preparation of the survey and its implementation. So, to answer the question, which knowledge must we produce, the first thing to do is to ask a certain number of questions about this order. That's what I call the analysis of the order. The analysis of the order, or the analysis of the research question. What does this consist in? It consists in several points that we are going to have a brief look at. We are going to spend a certain amount of time in going back to the genesis of this order. Try to identify at which point in the background of the production of knowledge, where does the order stand within this process. If the order is within a development project, for example, or an environmental project, or a territorial planning project, are we in an initial diagnostics phase? Are we in a study or the production of knowledge where we are currently going further in depth into the project, or are we towards the end and looking at evaluation questions? Also, if we are within a research program, are we at the very beginning of the research program, in the middle, or at the end? And the order will not be positioned in the same manner, because the articulation of the knowledge that we will be producing with the knowledge available is not the same. We will be in exploratory phase. We could be in a verification phase, in a counter-expertise phase. So the challenges and stakes of the study will not be the same. The for whom and why of these studies will be quite different depending on the positioning of the study in the general background of the research program, the development project, or planning project. So that's the first point. It is this analysis of the order. And we finish the analysis of the order by very briefly overviewing the local and temporal environment of the study, the scale at which the study is requested. If we're at a European, national or regional scale, or in a very small territory, we will not approach the survey in the same way. We won't be preparing it in the same way. We won't ask the questions in quite the same way. And we will also identify the means that we have available. The means can be time, but it can also be the people who will help us to carry out the survey or the study. It can be translators when we're in areas where we don't speak the local language, but it's also the means of transport. It can also be people who will be carrying out the survey with us. So all of this composes the analysis of the order. The second point is the construction of the problematic. So an order or a research question at the outset are formulated in a fairly brief manner. It might be at the very best 2 or 3 lines, one question. And from this very brief formulation, we have to attain a far more developed problematic with a certain number of questions and hypotheses for the responses. So to build or construct this problematic, we have a tool which I will call the dimensions of the study subject. The dimensions are the different aspects of a question or a survey subject. To show you what these different dimensions are, I'm going to take a very concrete example. Upon the evaluation of the introduction of mouflons in the Cévennes National Park in France, I applied these 6 dimensions. We were therefore trying to identify how the introduction of these mouflons was perceived. These species originate from Corsica in a national park in the metropolitan territory of France. When we apply the technical dimension to this research subject, we will be looking at hunting techniques, amongst others. Traditional hunting within the Massif Central is wild boar hunting, amongst others. There are other types of hunting, but it's principally wild boar hunting where they beat the game out of the brush, whereas mouflon hunting is individual hunting. So we will be obliged to describe these different hunting techniques and the link that they have between them. If we apply the economic dimension to the theme of the subject, we will be looking at the question of the value of the hunting trophies. The hunting trophies for mouflons have high value. So it is all of the economic resources of the different hunting societies, associations, for example. It's also the local and non-local clientele, even from abroad, who come and look for these hunting trophies, especially with regard to mouflons. The legal aspect of the subject led me to understand the rules on hunting plans, which define the number of heads or number of animals that can be killed during the hunting season, the number of females, the number of males, etc. The ideological dimension refers to the representation that we have of a given phenomenon. And here we're looking at the representation that we have of the mouflon, of the fact that it does not originate from the national park, but also the representation that social groups have of ecology, what biodiversity is, and also, therefore, local hunters and their claims or the objectives of ecologists. There are a certain number of representations, and there was also the representation that hunters had of themselves as a social group in almost disappearing group and a minority group in the French society, for example. The political dimension refers to the system of decision-making. For example, how do we manage local hunting associations? And also, how is the national park administered? How do we become a director or a president of a national park? What is the share of central power in Paris, which exerts local power right into the Massif Central? The social dimension refers to the relationships between the different social groups. So the power relationships, information and circulation of information, the alliances between the different groups, etc. So if we apply these dimensions to the question, this leads me to decomposing my question. How is the introduction of the mouflon perceived within this area? It leads me to decorticate this core question into a certain number of different questions. How do we perceive the income that stems from mouflon hunting? How do we perceive, how do we organize, how do we articulate the different hunting techniques, etc., etc.? This is how we move from a study theme of just a few lines to a written problematic that will provide us with a series of articulated questions which are ranked. They are not all of equal importance. For each of these questions, we will choose one, sometimes several theoretical frameworks, which will allow us to emit hypotheses for the responses. This allows us to extend the original theme and not to close ourselves in to the order. And a study order is very often biased because the person that issues this order can only see one side of the question, that which they are more familiar with regarding their training or their main concerns. It is important when we have to lead a study to come back to the order issuer with an extended analysis, and then we determine with the person whether we will really study all aspects of the question. So the end of the construction of the problematics consists in choosing the theoretical framework within which we will study these different questions. For each dimension, we will study the different theoretical frameworks that are available, the different concepts, the different theories that are available. For example, for the economic dimension, we have several aspects to economy. We have the economy of production, that of the consumer world, heritage. We have a certain number of theories. We have transaction economy also. So we have several theories that are available to us, and we will be looking at which is the theory that is the most relevant to the question that we will be studying. Or we will decide to study this within the framework of the theory of heritage or transactions, for example. So this theoretical framework will lead us to select a certain very precise vocabulary, which are concepts, and that we will then use to lead our study. In sociology and human sciences in general, we have a rather specific problem. And that is, in everyday language and everyday life, everybody has a sociological and economic experience. Everybody has relationships with groups. Everybody is a member of a group, an association, groups, student associations, a socio-professional group, a family even, which is a sociological group. So everybody has experience. And everybody can speak with the everyday vocabulary of phenomena which are specific to sociology. This is what we will call everyday vocabulary, and most of the time the terms that we use will be pre-notions. The term of power, for example, we might speak of teenagers speaking of the power of their headmaster on their everyday life. It will be a term that they use in their everyday vocabulary. This will not be a conceptual vocabulary which can be used to produce knowledge. We will have to clean up the vocabulary that we use in our everyday lives, which are specific to sociology or economy, to select far more precise concepts, which are generally defined within the framework of a theory. So this work is fairly theoretical. We need the literature to use this. There is a theoretical framework provided by other researchers or professors, but this is vital in order to clarify very clearly the survey subjects and the type of information that we will be collecting. Also, beyond the concepts that we choose, we will establish a certain number of characteristics which will give us analysis categories. I will take an example of an analysis category. To the economic concept of income, I can characterize income by defining different types of income. So in everyday language, we have a high income, a low income, or insufficient income. That's an initial way of approaching things. But we can have other analysis categories which can be far more relevant according to the survey theme. For example, we can have income that is regular or irregular income. We can have income that is safe or which are haphazard. So what I call an analysis category is the couple safe or haphazard. That is an analysis category that allows us to analyze the concept and characterize it according to a criterion, the certain, safe or haphazard character. Same thing for the analysis category of regular or irregular income. So it is the construction of these tools which allows us to analyze a phenomenon and which is the object of the construction of the problematic beyond the questions and response hypotheses. Once we've gone through this initial stage, the construction of the problematic, we already have a little more information as to which knowledge we are seeking to produce. There remains a final stage to go through, which is to define the scope of the survey. And that means the real environment in which we will be leading this survey. And this is not only expressed in terms of areas of studies. For example, a village or a company with the environment in which it's set, or a region, or the boundaries of a natural park. It goes well beyond the geographical zone. The real environment in which we lead a study in sociology, economy, or human sciences, generally speaking, will be composed of all of the social groups that are involved or concerned by this study. And these social groups, even if the survey is very localized on a village or, for example, a waste disposal center, the groups that are concerned by the survey of a prior diagnostic to the localization of a waste disposal center goes well beyond the immediate riparians of this waste disposal center. We will have groups from ecological groups. We will have the users of the space that live 30 or 50 kilometers away but come here to fish, to go for a walk or to hunt or go climbing or whatever other activity. We will have the funders. We will have the public authorities, the General Council, the Regional Council, which manage the waste management system at the department level or at the regional level. And we will also have the image of the site that will be conveyed by the presence of this waste selection system, and that might be harmful to a touristic site, which is 20 or 50 kilometers from the site, for example. So the scope of the study is not confined to the geographical area. It includes the social groups that are affected by this study. So the social groups might be concerned by the ideological, economic, political, legal or technical scope of the study. So we will question ourselves as to which is the scope of the study, how far do I have to lead my survey, and how far do I have to go to collect my information. And I will answer this question by looking at each of the dimensions of my survey. Each time I will extend or restrain the scope of my study. A final aspect of the question of the scope of the survey is the historical depth that I wish to give to my study. We can study a question at a given point in the present moment, but mostly we will give a certain historical depth to our question. We will look at what happened before. Where does this project of the Waste Selection Centre come from, for example? We will look at how waste is managed and the background of waste selection, the waste selection centres, for example. But how far will we go? And here we also have to define the historical depth that we wish to give to this study. This is a choice. It is more or less free. It depends on the order issuer. But the important thing is that the definition of the scope, both in terms of background, history and social space, that this definition of the scope must be explicit, it must be argumented, and it must be relevant. With the definition of the survey scope, we therefore obtain the limits, the outline and boundaries of the survey. This can be a scope which might be temporary, and whilst the study is underway, we might realise that we have restricted the survey too much for certain dimensions, and therefore we can re-question it and make other choices. We will therefore obtain a series of questions, the problematic, which are linked together and ranked. We have hypotheses of responses, and we have a framework, the limits within which we will try to obtain the information that allows us to answer, respond to these questions, or to verify the hypotheses.